You've been injured in an accident. You've missed time from work. How do you get that money? We're going to talk about it on this week's Monday Morning Lawyer. Good morning, everybody. It is your favorite accident and injury attorney right here from my Elkton office. That's right. It's Jobeth Bowers coming at you with another Monday Morning Lawyer episode. This week, we are talking about wage loss. It's a topic that comes up in a lot of my cases. Most of my clients end up missing at least a handful of days from work, sometimes even longer, especially if there's a surgery involved, which happens with a lot of our cases here. So how do you get paid for it? Who's going to pay for it? What do you need to get paid for it? What are some tricky situations that could make it not so easy? And how do you make it easier to get your wages paid for when you're in an auto accident? So it's a pretty simple concept. We've talked about other types of damages that go into these cases, your medical bills and all of the care that goes into these cases. But wage loss is something that, like I said, it comes up in almost every case, but it requires a few extra steps to get things done. Number one thing that my clients often miss, even though we remind them about this and we try to push the issue and we work as well as we can with the doctors to facilitate all of this, if a doctor is giving you time off of work, or if the hospital is telling you not to go back to work for a couple of days or a week, or recently we had one where it was several months that they knew that the client would not be able to return to work, make sure that they are putting that in writing. It needs to come from a doctor. And why do I say this? Why do I emphasize that? When you're in an accident and you miss time from work, it has to be, at least in order for you to get fully compensated for it, it has to be something where a doctor told you not to go to work because of your injuries. So it's not enough to wake up one day, and I know that in the recovery process, we have good days and we have bad days, to wake up, have one of those bad days and just decide not to go to work. If that's what you need, there's nothing wrong with that. However, without a doctor's note putting you off of work, saying not to go in because of your injuries, it's going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for our office to get you compensation for that. So step one is the doctor's note saying don't go to work. Step two is that you don't go to work. It seems obvious, it seems simple, it seems straightforward, but I feel the need that I have to mention it. Not that anybody's really tried to do this, but if you get the off work slip and you go to work, you didn't miss the time from work. So we're not going to be able to get you compensated for the wages. The next step, which is, I would say, relatively easier for most of our clients, but not all, and I'll get into the exceptions to this, is a form that our office will provide you called a wage and salary verification form. We'll provide the form. Your employer needs to fill out the form. And sometimes, especially with bigger companies, some of our clients don't know exactly who to take the form to. And the first person that you should talk to and approach to have fill out this form to verify your wages and salary would be the same person at your company that if you needed a day off, if you were going to request a day off, or, hey, I'm taking a vacation in June, I need to schedule those days off of work, that same point of contact at your office is probably the same person, or at least the same department, that you're going to take this wage and salary verification form to. That's the form. They're going to be able to get that filled out for you. I recommend, because especially in some of these bigger companies, people get super busy, that you show up in their office, you hand them the form, and you wait. You wait for them to get the form completed for you, because otherwise it may sit on somebody's desk and it may sit for 2-3 months. So those are the three things And again, these apply mostly to W-2 employees, people who have a paycheck, they're getting paid a salary or an hourly wage every week, every 2 weeks, whatever the payroll period is, different for every company. That's kind of the most straightforward way to have that happen. It gets a little trickier when we have people who are self-employed and they work for themselves and they do not have a normal W-2 salary. These types of employment situations, you're still eligible, assuming that you have the doctor's note and you actually don't work, but substantiating the amount is not always so straightforward. So if you're not an employee, a W-2 employee of the company that you run, this would be more of a, it's an incorporation or an S corp or something like that. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details on that, but if you're not getting a regular paycheck from your own company where the taxes are taken out, it can be trickier. So in this situation, we need to be able to substantiate a drop in business, which usually can be done utilizing tax returns. Or if you have actual contracts that you had to cancel because of it, those could potentially be used. With self-employed individuals, a lot of it comes down on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you end up needing to hire a new employee or a temporary employee to take over your responsibilities during the period in which you're disabled and written off of work. If that is the case, proper documentation can show that, showing that that person started after the accident, was hired because of you being out of work for an extended period of time because of your injuries. The important thing that is all encompassing for all of these scenarios, no matter which way it is, whether you're a W-2 employee, whether you just lost business as a self-employed individual, or you had to hire somebody temporarily to cover what you couldn't cover, the documentation is key. So if you are in a situation where your tax returns are required to substantiate what you were making before and how much less you were making now, but you haven't filed your taxes in 5 or 6 years, it's going to be very difficult for us to do what we need to do to get wage loss to be part of the claim. It doesn't negate the claim by any means, but it makes it difficult, if not impossible, for us to add in the lost wage element. Additionally, if you are somebody that's working under the table, or you're working in, let's say as a server, so you get a very small hourly wage and then you get cash tips. If we don't have something, again, in writing, something that, you've got to imagine fast forwarding to a scenario where, hey, if we can't settle this case with the insurance company, we're going to take it to trial. What would be considered evidence to a court, whether it's in front of a judge or a jury, to say, hey, this individual was hurt, they missed time from work, this is what they would have earned. That's the 3 basic things that we need, regardless of the scenario. They're hurt and shouldn't work, they didn't work, this is what they would have made. So ultimately, if you can imagine and think about any of the documentation that would be required to prove what you would have made, whether it be comparing tax returns, whether it be contracts that you had to reschedule, cancel. Because if you think about it, let's say that you are a general contractor or a construction worker, handyman, roof guy, whatever the case may be. You work for yourself. Maybe you have a small crew, maybe you don't. And let's say you get injured and you have to delay a job. So you end up doing the job, but you delay the job for 2 weeks. And let's hope that your client is okay with you delaying that job for 2 weeks. Well, you presumably would have to have pushed that job to when you would have done another. So maybe you didn't lose out on the job that was scheduled, but you lost out on the job that would have filled the time that you had to push the current job to. So again, talk with us, sit down with us, explain and let us walk through your situation, because as a self-employed person, there are different ways and different types of documentation that we might be able to use to substantiate that wage loss. Are they more difficult situations? Absolutely. But it can be done with the right documentation. Now, how do you get paid for it? Well, there's a couple of ways that you can get paid for the time that you missed from work. I'm going to start at the end and work my way forward, because the end part would apply to anybody and everybody that has all of the documentation to substantiate the wage loss. And that is at the time of settlement from the at-fault driver and really their insurance company. Because again, if I haven't reminded you enough on this podcast, it's the insurance companies that are paying for these claims. So if you ever find yourself to be a member of a jury and the trial that you're sitting in on and you're deliberating on has to do with injuries from an auto accident, even though it might be person A versus person B, the defendant, person B, they're not paying that claim. Their insurance company, which won't be mentioned to you during the trial, is ultimately who cuts that check. So the insurance company is going to pay that claim at settlement or at the time of verdict, assuming, of course, all the documentation is there. However, in Maryland, you may have and you should have personal injury protection coverage. This is a first-party, no-fault coverage. I have talked about it on so many different videos on the website, videos on the YouTube channel, podcast episodes, articles, extensively. If you have done one of my free auto insurance reviews, if you have been a client of mine, we have spoken about your PIP insurance. I have advised you to increase it. I have told you to undo a waiver. If you've waived it, whatever the case may be, you should have this personal injury protection coverage. In Maryland, it will pay up to 85% of your wage loss. What does that mean? Well, if your calculation for time missed from work would have gotten you $1,000 before tax, the personal injury protection will pay you $850. That's 85% of the 1,000. And again, whatever the number is, it's not going to be exactly like that. Rarely is it ever clean because we work hourly and you know there's change involved. But that's another place that it can come from. One of the important things to note is if your personal injury protection pays that, you can still get paid for it in the settlement. Things that get paid from PIP, from health insurance, from otherwise do not act against you. The at-fault driver and his or her insurance company don't get the benefit of good decisions that you made to use health insurance, to have PIP insurance, to have extra PIP insurance. So that's part of the reason why we always stress use your health insurance for medical bills and and all of that kind of stuff, and B, increase that PIP insurance. A lot of insurance companies, and this is why getting this documentation early is important. A lot of those insurance companies, when they open up the PIP claim, they take the first bills, the first wages, the first whatever, and they pay them. And they pay them until the PIP is exhausted and the PIP is gone, which means if you've got a $3,000-$4,000 hospital bill and that gets there first, you might not be able to get your wages. So another thing, contacting our office from the beginning, even before you contact any of the insurance companies, could be the difference between getting your wages from your PIP and not getting your wages from your PIP, because sometimes it is a race. We're going to know how to handle that. We're also going to know, I'm not going to take the time to list all the insurance companies that operate first in and first out with PIP, but we know who they are. We know how to get things slowed down so that you can get your wages paid if that's something that's important to you. Additionally, your company may offer, and you may have, a long-term or a short-term disability policy. A lot of people have it. Sometimes you might even have one privately. Most people don't. Most of those are driven by their employer and offered through the employer. But if you have the long or the short-term disability, it's usually pretty easy to get what you need to move that part forward. But a lot of times some of that documentation is something that's easier for our office to get than for you to get. So we will work with you in that process. That way, if you need the disability slips that the doctor has issued or any sort of medical records, you can get that easily from us if we've obtained it already, and most of the time that we have. So we're happy to help and facilitate that. I will say some, not all, but some of these disability policies have a contractual obligation that if it's an auto accident or some other type of injury, and there is a settlement or a resolution, that they might be entitled to get reimbursed some, if not all, of what they paid out. So it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because I think that you'd rather have the money when you're missing the time from work. Most people would, and have that get reimbursed out of the settlement. But again, not all of these plans have that. In fact, more of these plans do not have that than I've seen have that in all of the years that I have been working in this area of law. So it definitely super important to communicate that you have that with our office, because that's going to make sure that we can do everything so that you don't get sued after the case for a reimbursement that was due that we didn't know about. So those are all the things. Again, wage loss can be super easy, can be pretty tricky and complicated. It's all on a case-by-case basis. Again, super easy with W-2 employees, but not everybody's a W-2 employee. So that's all I have for this week. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. We circle through, we respond to them if they're something that we can answer. If it's a different question that you have about a different area of law, there it is, info@bowerslawmd.com. Or even if it's something you want us to go deeper into this or one of the other topics on the podcast, shoot us an email. We're happy to do a podcast episode that answers your questions. And as always, if it's something that I don't do and we don't do here in this office, which is, well, pretty much just auto accidents, we're going to link up. I'm going to link up with somebody that knows what they're doing and can answer your questions. And as I've done numerous times before, we're going to bring them on here on the podcast. We're going to have a nice little chat with them. You're going to get the answers to your questions. So until next week, this is your Elkton Accident and Injury Guy, Jobeth Bowers. I am signing off. Be safe out there. Be well. I'll see you next Monday.